From the east comes dawn's rosy fingers, climbing early in the sky. Then, just behind, the full sun. The sun has already circled the earth and looked upon distant lands and faraway peoples. It has shone down on the mansions of the rich and the hovels of the poor. It has been witness to both good and evil. Now, unsullied from its tireless journey, it brings us a new day. My name is John Marsh. I serve as interim minister of the Unitarian Society of New Haven. I welcome you all to this Sunday service for April 5th, 2020. In the Hebrew calendar, this is a time of Passover. In the Western Christian calendar, this morning is Palm Sunday. Wherever you find yourself on life's journey, I hope you find messages of comfort and healing and challenge here with us this morning. You could be spending this time watching videos of kittens and puppies doing all kinds of amazing things, but you chose to spend this time with this congregation, gathered by necessity electronically at this time, but composed of very real people. I am so glad you made it this far. This is a congregation that believes that Black lives matter, that every person has a right to affirm their own gender identity, and that all people are inherently worthy. We acknowledge that our sanctuary sits on the traditional lands of the Quinnipiac Nation. As a congregation, we strive to heal the wounds of the past and the present in the ongoing work of reconciliation. We seek to connect and serve in the sacred hope that we might grow the sum total of love and justice in our world. Please join me in the words for the lighting of our chalice. We light this chalice for all who went before us, remembering the pleasures they enjoyed, the causes they advanced, the sacrifices they made for the common good. We light this chalice for whatever comes next. May our time together be a blessing for all those who will live after us. We light this chalice for ourselves in this present moment. May we honestly face our fears and our failings. May we forgive any slights we imagine others have done to us. May we help others and allow others to help us. May we wash our hands often. May we enjoy our daily bread. Please join me and the Shroth Duma family in singing our opening song, The Morning Hangs a Signal. It will be followed by a message for all by our Director of Lifespan Religious Education, Jesse Greist.
The morning Good morning. My name is Jesse Grice, Director of Lifespan Religious Education. I am so happy to be here in this space with all of you today. And I am very grateful to those of you that joined us for our Seder last night. Our Passover Seder each year is a special tradition that we've had at USNH. During that Seder, we leave a cup out for the prophet Elijah and another one for the prophet Miriam. This morning's story, which is based on a story by Eliza Davy Pierman, it comes from the tradition of Passover and also involves a story about leaving a cup out for Elijah. Now, once upon a time, not long ago, there were two siblings, Lee and Sam, who were close to the age of many of you here in our congregation. They were Jewish, and Passover was a very special time for them and their family. They would spend days before the Passover Seder cleaning their house, getting rid of all the breadcrumbs and dust and cobwebs, and they would sit down on the day of Passover with their family, and they would have a special dinner prepared, and they would engage in the ritual of the Passover Seder. Now, one of their favorite parts of the Passover Seder was filling up a cup and leaving it by the door for the prophet Elijah. And they would open the door just a crack and leave that door open for Elijah, the prophet, to come in. And each year they would wait with excitement for the spirit of the prophet Elijah to come through that door. However, year by year, a question grew in Lee and Sam's minds. Where was the prophet? What did this prophet look like? Would they ever actually see him? Well, one year they could not take it any longer. They sat down at the table and they asked, every year we open the door for Elijah, but we never see him. Who is Elijah? What does he look like? Everyone at the table looked around a little nervously, and the Sam and Lee's parents looked at grandmother, and they said, Grandmother, maybe you can tell Lee and Sam who Elijah is and if it's actually possible to see them. All eyes turned down to look at grandmother, and grandmother began to tell a story. I have seen the prophet Elijah once. It was way back long ago in the old country, back before we came here to America. We lived in a small village that we called a shtetl, and back then, all of the families still practiced Passover and still honored Passover. We would prepare for days, and I remember there was one year when I was in the middle of a Passover Seder, and I came to leave the cup at the door for Elijah. I was very surprised because as I came over to the door to leave the cup out, there was a knock at the door. I was scared at first, and I thought maybe this is the prophet Elijah. When I opened the door, I was surprised once again to find that the person at the door was actually a local beggar. He often came to our door asking for food, asking for shelter, asking for any kind of help we could give. Well, I looked at him and I knew that we were very, very poor and we did not have very much to share. Our house was small and we only had just enough food for our own Passover feast. So I said to him, I'm so sorry. We have nothing to share with you. Please move along. I watched, a little bit sad, but knowing that I had done the right thing, as the beggar moved on to our neighbor's house. Our neighbors were even poorer than we were, and they had even less to share. So you can imagine my surprise when the beggar knocked on their door and they invited him in. I thought to myself, how is this possible? They have even less than we do. It was then that I realized that that beggar was actually the prophet Elijah. You see, it is very important for us to treat each and every person as if they are the prophet Elijah. Each and every person is holy. Each and every person has worth and dignity. And so, my dears, even all these years later, I remember the lesson of that day, watching my neighbors as they let the prophet inside, that it is our duty and our job to let the prophet in, to keep a door open in our hearts. Even when we feel we do not have enough, there's always a little bit to share. Grandmother's story was finished. For a while there was quiet around the table, and then eventually Lee spoke up and said, "I think I know how we can see the prophet Elijah now. Grandmother, would it be okay if we invited our new neighbors, the refugees, over to our table to share in our Passover Seder?" Grandmother and mother and father looked around the table and eventually nodded and said, "Yes, I think that would be a good way for us to let the prophet Elijah into our homes." So they opened the doors, they went outside, they invited their neighbors, who quickly came over and brought even some of the food that they had. And the feast around the table multiplied, and there was enough for everyone. Now, let us all remember the story of Lee and Sam, grandmother, and the way they opened their door to a prophet Elijah who manifested in the hearts and bodies of everyone around us. Let us all open the door of our hearts to the stranger, to the refugee, to rich and poor alike, and let us keep a space in our hearts this Passover and throughout this year, especially as we are in this time of isolation, and know that there will be ways for us to open the doors to all the prophets in our world. Go in peace. Blessed be.
Social justice work has long been a foundation of Unitarian Universalism. The Apostle James, said to be the brother of Jesus, said that faith without works is dead. And in the last century, our own Unitarian Universalist theologian, James Luther Adams, said that right attitudes are never sufficient alone. They must find embodiment. This week, we will hear from Tisa Wenger about the work of this congregation's Social Justice Council.
Good morning. My name is Tisa Wenger, and I'm representing your Social Justice Council today. The Social Justice Council works to support all the social justice task forces at USNH. And even though we can't gather in person for now, this work is more important than ever. For our Faith in Action today, I want to read a poem by Unitarian Universalist minister Elizabeth Mien. This is the part where we commandeer cruise ships for people migrating to feast at all-you-can-eat buffets and party poolside and then split the corporate profits with the staff, right? This is the part where we teach ourselves how to make our own medicine, the kind from herbs and grandma's recipes and vaccines and antivirals and insulin and EpiPens too, right? This is the part where we open our spare rooms to the college student whose school is closed and the asylum seeker who just got out of detention and our coworker who just got evicted and the queer teen who needs a place to crash, right? This is the part where we feed lunch to the kid whose school is canceled and text the people who can't be in public spaces anymore and we breathe, right? This is the part where we introduce ourselves to our neighbors we've been living next to for 10 years because tomorrow we might need each other, right? This is the part where we ask, what do I really need for surviving, and find a way to seek no more and no less, right? This is the part where we stay home, we cancel, we show up, we call, we fight, we let go, we stay. We don't let anyone go it alone, right? This is the part where when we say we mean we elderly, we immunocompromised, we sick, we well, we in prison, we free, we who can buffer our way out with money and privilege, and we who definitely can't. Right? Right. This is the part where we call, we fight, we don't let anyone go it alone. Right? Right. Thank you.
The poet Khalil Gibran writes, "The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Together they come. When one sits alone with you at your table, remember that the other is asleep under your bed." Each week, we acknowledge the joys and sorrows that sit with us in this community. Our healing thoughts and prayers are sent to George Deming, who has tested positive for COVID-19. He is at the Yale New Haven's Hospital's St. Raphael's campus. He's not allowed any visitors or gifts. However, he would enjoy hearing from people. He hopes to be released from the hospital tomorrow, Monday. Jacqueline D. Wade is missing her father, who died 15 years ago today. She writes, "Each year I miss him more and more." Our heartfelt sympathy is with Jerry Klepper and Shirley Dion, whose stepdaughter Marcy died this past Friday after a brave 5-year battle with sarcoma cancer. We send our healing and supportive thoughts to all persons who have experienced a death in their family, all persons who live in places not of their own choosing, refugees in camps, people in prison, people in hospitals. I invite you to share your other joys and concerns during the digital coffee hour that will follow this service. We won't be able to talk all at once. However, we can all at once type our messages into the chat, which can be read and will be read by our pastoral care team and our covenantal relations committee, which are reaching out to individuals in the congregation during this time of pandemic. You can also email us joys and sorrows to read next week at membership@usnh.org. Also, please let us know if you would appreciate a phone call from a member of our enlarged pastoral care team, or if you would like help setting up Zoom or some other thing on your computer or television. Electronic media, like it or not, is how we roll these days. And if you would like help with technical issues, or you would like to talk to someone to vent your frustration about technical issues, we are here to listen and sometimes even solve problems. We will now hear testimony on behalf of the stewardship team's annual pledge drive from Jerry Klepper and Shirley Dion.
I am Shirley Dion.
And I'm Jerry Klepper, and this is our slightly less than 4-minute testimony about why the USNH community is important to our emotional and mental well-being. We are among the newest members, having first attended Sunday service in June of 2018, and quickly we became members in the class of November 2018.
Our search started with the realization that as we retired and got older, our circle of friends, especially interesting and stimulating friends, was getting smaller and smaller. They moved away. Maybe they were shunning us. Some passed away. We dropped out of some groups or relationships as our interests evolved. In any case, we are going to have to work on growing and maintaining our people connections.
We did an inventory of interests and what causes we were supporting with donations. As we discussed what these meant to us, my background as a Unitarian active in the heady movements of the 60s suggested that we look into Unitarianism again, as it could possibly include many of the interests and causes that we were already supporting.
I was in high school in the 60s, and I've had no religious affiliation in decades, having completely rebelled against my Catholic school education in grades 2 through 8. Although we had some knowledge of the Westport UU Society, we decided on an exploratory investigation of all Unitarian societies locally.
The websites provided our first impression of what each congregation might look like. The choir and music activities of USNH, CRRI, as well as the broad range of activities. We decided to make an exploratory visit.
When we attended our first USNH service on June 3rd, 2018, we were impressed that we were welcomed at the door and given a visitor badge, which elicited numerous welcome greetings from other attendees. We heard the choir and Reverend Megan's sermon, which was so inspiring and provoked an amazingly emotional response. Altogether, these immediately made us feel that we had found an answer to our search.
Now, to accomplish our goals came the work of choosing how to be involved and how to help ensure that the society's ecosystem will remain viable. Support requires awareness, time, and money.
Awareness of the many programs, how they are active, and how they fit with our own priorities.
Time requires us to make space in our schedules to participate.
Money means a pledge that enables the community to plan and to function.
So we are working and becoming aware of more details of the many programs. I sing in the choir. We are both in the folk music group. Shirley is part of the Building and Grounds Committee. We realize the financial challenge that USNH is facing, including the effects of engaging a new settled minister. We're looking forward to the continuity of a settled minister.
We have pledged and increased our pledge last year and now again this year.
We consider ourselves as part of this loving and effective community. Stay safe, stay at home, be well.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Mary Donahue, and I'm serving you on the Stewardship Committee this year. I want to thank Shirley and Jerry for their inspiring testimonial this morning. You have been hearing testimonials from people over the past 5 weeks who have shared why giving to USNH is important to them. We would ask each of you to think about the things that you love about USNH and why giving is important to you. I'd like to share a few updates from the Stewardship Committee. We are on our way toward meeting our goal to support the incredible efforts of our USNH community, but we have a little ways to go. To date, we have received a total of $366,754, which is about 76% of our $500,000 goal. We have another important goal for this year as well, and that is to have 100% participation of the congregation in our stewardship efforts. To date, about 56% of members have pledged. We need everyone to be all in. If you have not yet submitted your pledge, we urge you to do so soon and to be as generous as you possibly can. The Stewardship Committee thanks everyone for their very generous and wonderful support. And we also want to let you know that the gala celebration that we had planned to mark the end of our stewardship campaign, which was scheduled for April 18th, has been rescheduled now to June 13th. And we hope that we will be able to have our celebration and to see everyone there. Once again, Stewardship thanks you for all of your support, and want to let you know that this is now the point in our service where we would normally pass our collection plates. If you open a new window on your browser and go to a congregation's web page, you can make a plate offering or make a pledge for next year's budget with just a few clicks. You could do that any time of the day or night, or you could do it right now.
Our reading this morning is a poem called Riveted by Robin Sarah. It is possible that things will not get better than they are now, or have been known to be. It is possible that we are past the middle now. It is possible that we have crossed the great water without knowing it, and stand now on the other side. Yes, I think we have crossed it. Now we are being given tickets, and they are not the tickets to the show we had been thinking of, but to a different show, clearly inferior. Check again. It is our own name on the envelope. The tickets are to that other show. It is possible that we will walk out of the darkened hall without waiting for the last act. People do. Some people do. But it is probable that we will stay seated in our narrow seats all through the tedious denouement to the unsurprising end, riveted, as it were, spellbound by our own imperfect lives. Because they are lives, and because they are ours.
Feel free to sing along. When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we see. No, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should crumble and fall, and the mountains should tumble to the sea, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Whenever we're in trouble, won't you stand by me? Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me.
This morning is Palm Sunday in the Christian calendar. A lot of spiritual leaders talk about being centered, balanced. But if you're going to get anywhere in this world, you are going to have to be off balance part of the time. The act of walking is a process of continually losing and recovering your balance. Palm Sunday is about losing balance. It is about radical engagement. It is about moving forward, knowing that there might be painful consequences, not knowing what the consequences will be, but knowing that doing nothing is not an option. Palm Sunday is about enthusiasm over a Savior, someone who is going to come and make everything all right for everybody. It is about Jesus riding into town on a borrowed donkey, and the folks just going crazy, hooting and hollering and laying down their clothes and palm fronds in his path so that the feet of his donkey, the donkey he is riding, won't have to touch the earth. The ruckus captures the attention of the authorities, who tell Jesus, quiet things down a bit. Impossible, he replies. I couldn't keep this crowd quiet even if I wanted to. If I did manage to calm the people, the rocks and stones themselves would start making noise. Jesus is the man. He is the ticket. And he uses the moment to disrupt the way things are done at the big temple. It is a time in Judaism is still practicing animal sacrifice. People come all over to do this at the big temple. So to accommodate them, there are people there to exchange currencies and sell them the livestock which they can use to perform their ritual sacrifice. According to the recorded story, Jesus is not so much upset by the animal sacrifices as he is that the people have turned the holy temple into a shopping mall. He overturns the tables of the money changers and the merchants, throwing them out of the temple. But upsetting established ways of doing business is always risky. Vested interests have always been good at influencing popular opinion. The same crowd that wanted to proclaim Jesus their king on Sunday is screaming for his death on Friday. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, does not really want to execute Jesus, according to this story. He doesn't see the justification. He advises Jesus about how he can save his skin, how he can play the game. The governor decides to give the crowd what it wants, and Pontius Pilate is centered in his own world. His actions are calculated and deliberate. He represents a commonplace kind of evil. He's not trying to do ill. He's simply trying to manage things as best he can in a world where any choice he makes is going to hurt or offend someone. His first commitment is to keep himself in power and make the government run smoothly. He does not have a radical commitment to caring. He has a basin of water brought out after he and Jesus can't agree on things, and he symbolically dips his hands in the water as if to say, I wash my hands of this death. Yet it is under his authority that Jesus is executed. Questions of good and evil and the law are never far away from the story of Jesus. And there's also this ongoing animal presence. You remember that animals attended the birth of Jesus, adding a touch of serenity and warmth to an otherwise boisterous affair of journeying and trumpeting and political intrigue. Towards the end of his life, Jesus is once more in a big political intrigue attended by a donkey, a slow animal known for its patience and stubbornness. Easter, that part of the story that comes next Sunday, is more of a fairy tale, more about a man who dies and then comes back to life, more powerful than ever. Who knows? Perhaps he is swimming with the dolphins in the canals of Venice, even as I speak. It sort of works as a story, but perhaps not the story we need at the present moment. At the present moment, I think what we need is to re-examine the historical context that we can be sort of certain about and think about our own current historical context, which we can be a little more certain about, but not entirely. So what do we really know about the man upon whose birth our calendars proclaim year one? Not much. I know at least one Unitarian Universalist minister who believes that Jesus as an individual never existed. I am of the school of thought that believes probably Jesus did exist, and in fact many such men existed, and probably some women as well. When I was growing up, I imagined Jesus' youth being rather like the picture painted by Dean Cornwell called A Carpenter's Shop in Nazareth. My grandfather, who died before I was born, was a free thinker, and he kept this painting in the home, which he shared with my grandmother, who kept it on the wall after he died, where I saw it when I was growing up. And since then, it has been passed on to me. Cornwell, known as the Dean of American Illustrators, took a trip to Palestine in the mid-1920s and did a series of paintings which were very popular in the day. The picture shows a grown man and a pre-adolescent boy. They are engaged in woodworking. They are barefoot, so there's not a huge amount of opulence here, but the colors are rich. The clothes are comfortable. The bodies look healthy. The figures are not looking at each other. Both seem to be thinking about more than the work that they are doing with their hands. They are contemplative, and they invite us to be contemplative, which is a nice touch. The painting was realistically innovative for its day in that there are no halos. Jesus seems to be more fair-skinned than Joseph, but one never knows. According to modern scholarship, however, Cornwell got it all wrong. According to Raza Aslan, who wrote one of the most recent biographies of Jesus called Zealot, the young Jesus of Nazareth would have never known anything near this kind of luxury. I quote from Raslan's book. If the Gospels are correct that he was from a village called Nazareth, and that he came from a family of tekton, woodworkers or builders, what that means is that he was among the poorest of the poor. The word tekton was actually a term of abuse among the Romans, who used it as a slang for uncouth or illiterate peasant. Ancient Nazareth was a small village of perhaps 100 Jewish families or less, located on a hilltop in Lower Galilee. Aslan describes it as a tiny hamlet of mud and brick homes, a place so small and inconsequential that it appears on no maps prior to the 1st century. The carpenter Joseph would not have owned any of his own tools. He and his son would have been dressed in colorless rags. Aslan paints a picture of Jesus whose first passion was overthrowing the Roman occupation of his country. Aslan thinks most of the messages about forgiveness and reconciliation were later add-ons. However, I submit to you that the two messages are not entirely mutually exclusive. I also submit that if there was not a primary figure on whom our stories of Jesus are based, there were lots of figures who fit the description. It may have been a kind of composite. There were dozens of religious prophets in that part of the world at that time. Many of them were preaching about forgiveness. There were also lots of them preaching about throwing out the Roman occupation. There was a name for them, zealots. One example of a preacher who was doing a little bit of both was John the Baptist, whose followers thought he was the Messiah, which is certainly why there is a story in the Gospels that has John saying, "Oh, no, not me. I am not the Messiah. It's this other guy who I am baptizing. He's the Messiah." And good PR work there. And when it comes to Roman crucifixions, there were sadly lots and lots of them. The ancient Romans believed that the best defense was a good offense. after the slave revolt led by Spartacus, some 6,000 men were crucified at a single go. When they took over countries, villages that resisted were sometimes entirely destroyed. One of the least likely incidents in the story that we are given is that the Roman governor took any interest in the crucifixion of Jesus. Governors of Rome did not take interest in the crucifixions of peasants. They just happened. I would argue that the primary reason Jesus was crucified was because he was an impoverished man, seen as a troublemaker, living in a brutal time. It was about time and circumstance, which brings me in a big leap to our own time and circumstance. Some say that the current pandemic is an equalizer in that it reaches people of all economic levels. But let's be real. Let's look at the things that we really should be looking at. The poor people in this country are going to be affected far worse than those with ample resources. Let me hold up two causes. The leader of our federal government really does not believe in government. Let me quote Heather Cox Richardson. Behind the foot dragging as the White House confronts the global pandemic is the administration's desire to dismantle the federal government and give power to business people. The Trump administration has been clear that it does not want the federal government to assume responsibility for American citizens any longer. Trump has refused to issue a stay-at-home order from the federal government, insisting that governors make their own calls. He has refused to use the Defense Production Act to mobilize industry to produce the masks and ventilators Americans so desperately need. He is refusing to tell manufacturers where to place their supplies. In place of government coordination, his administration officials are counting on business people to assume leadership. Instead, the 50 states are trying to respond on their own. They are making their own decisions about what to shut down, when, and are bidding against each other for supplies. This piecemeal response to the pandemic crisis means we are not effectively cutting off the spread of the virus or supporting the health care we will need. The other great concern is the relative poverty that exists in the southeastern United States. Charles Blow writes, "What is most worrisome is the racial disparity in prior health conditions that exist in the United States. As Bloomberg reported about a study of the deaths in Italy, almost half of the victims suffered from at least 3 prior illnesses, and about a fourth had either 1 or 2 previous conditions. More than 75% had high blood pressure. About 35% had diabetes, and about a third suffered from heart disease. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, high blood pressure is most common among non-Hispanic Black men, about 54%, and Black people have the highest death rate from heart disease. As for diabetes, the 2015 National Medical Association Scientific Assembly delivered these stark statistics. African American patients are more likely than white patients to have diabetes. The risk of diabetes is 77% higher among African Americans than among non-Hispanic white Americans. The rates of diagnosis of diabetes in non-Hispanic African Americans is 18.7 compared to 7.1. The group went on to say that in 2006, African Americans with diabetes were 1.5 times more likely to be hospitalized and 2.3 times more likely to die from diabetes than non-Hispanic whites. In addition, many southern states refused to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, and there is a rural hospital crisis in this country. But that crisis is compounded in the South where, as the magazine Facing South points out, the rural areas have higher poverty rates, higher mortality rates, and lower life expectancies than other rural regions of the country. Do crucifixions still happen today? Well, in this country, the form is different, but yes, they do. Let's take a moment to pause, to remember Jesus of Nazareth and the over 8,000 people in our country who have already died from COVID-19. And those who will die in the coming weeks. Let us sing together, O Sacred Head, now wounded. So how can we stay real and stumble forward in our own time of uncertainty? We can begin by staying together as a community. We can remind ourselves that our primary reason for being is not just so we can make money from each other. We can honestly say to ourselves that although our current situation is bleak, it is still much better than others that has been faced before us. In 1918, the United States government censored the press from telling the public about the pandemic that was happening then for fear that it would lower morale in the midst of World War I. In the state of Massachusetts, doctors working on a vaccine recruited volunteers from military prisons to be exposed to the flu without telling the volunteers about the full risks involved. In a poetic twist of history, the only person to die in that experiment was one of the doctors administering the exposure to the flu. The electronic mediums that allow me to talk to you this morning is a game changer for everything, and mostly for the good. Our knowledge about medicine has progressed so much, and we have professionals around the world exchanging information at lightning speed, and this can only be to the good. We have an amazing corps of well-trained medical professionals. The name Dr. Anthony Fauci is on everyone's lips, as well it should be. I would compare him to Jesus in this way. More important than the man himself is what he represents. Something bigger than himself, something shared by thousands in his profession and in other professions as well. Commitment to integrity and to work for the common good. Finally, what is being asked of most of us during this time, although it can seem a lot and too much for some people, is really not that much. My mother always told me that no good could come from my sitting at home watching television. I always suspected she was wrong about that. Now, by doing just that, we are saving the world. Please join me in singing Wade in the Water. Please join me in the words for the extinguishing of our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. As benediction, I offer the words of Ernest Hocking. There is no choice but to immerse oneself in the stream of history, accept one's time location, breathe in, with shared memories and hopes, the contamination of tradition, become defined as the person of this cause, this party, this emergency. Failure to accept responsibility, refusal to take a stand on vital issues, timid rejection, as one must reject false tags of the ties of a true belonging. These are denials of life. In effect, they are deeds of death. To understand the times in which we live, to add our weight to the scales on the side of solidarity and equality within valid difference. This is life with shape and character, the one eternity worth having. Stay in touch.
Good morning, beloved USNH congregation. We have an announcement on behalf of the Ministerial Search Committee. We are 3 of the 6 members who are available this morning.
It is our honor to share the joyful message that we have selected a ministerial candidate who has chosen us as well. As soon as we possibly can, we'll send you a personal announcement and introduction to this wonderful minister.
There are details to complete in the coming days and also a week in May to plan for everyone's participation in virtual activities and meetings and voting. Thank you for the trust you have placed in us as your searchers and for your input and support along the way.
We are thrilled to have reached this place, and we look forward to including you in the steps to follow. We trust that you will be as excited as we are about this new ministry for USNH.